We take you live now to Melbourne, where Kevin Andrews, the Shadow Minister for Families, Housing and Human Services, is holding a news conference.
Ripping up his agreement, but then to come out and say the reason I was doing this is because I couldn't secure the numbers, not having approached and lobbied Tony Crook and Bob Katter, is a further deception. And this simply goes to the character of the Prime Minister. There is now a pattern of behaviour from this Prime Minister in terms of being prepared to say or do one thing in order to secure an immediate objective, such as there'll be no carbon tax, and then turning around when it suits her to change that and then to deceive us about why she's doing it. This is just appalling behaviour on the part of the Prime Minister. Secondly, can I say something about the proposals that the government has in relation to the trial? This all arose because it was a base political consideration on the part of the Prime Minister to sign a deal with Andrew Wilkie. There had been no deep policy consideration of whether or not things like mandatory pre-commitment would work. And yet now we've got the government coming out and saying that here's a range of things that we propose. And when you look at them, things like improving education and counselling, things like having some restrictions in relation to providing credit for online bookmakers and the like, these are things which have been taken directly from the opposition's policy document. So not only did the government do no policy work in the first place, they've done very little policy work now. Now, we're happy if they're prepared to implement what we consider to be good policy, but it shows once again how incompetent and out of touch the Labor government is.
So are you upset that this deal has fallen over then?
Look, I'm not upset about these arrangements. What I'm upset about is that there was a deception of Andrew Wilkie in the first place, and now we're being told the reason is I can't secure the numbers in the House, and yet two of the independent members of the House haven't been approached for their vote. That's simply a deception on the Australian people. And as I said, coming on top of ripping up the agreement, this is very poor form from the Prime Minister.
Is it a deception or is it an assessment of the likely chance of success?
Well, if you want to know the likely chance of success, you go and ask people how they're going to vote. On a whole range of other issues, Julia Gillard and Jenny Macklin and this government have gone out to the independents in order to woo them to get their vote. And yet we learned from Mr Crook that the last time there was any mention whatsoever of gambling and poker machines was 5 months ago, and Bob Katter, who's a pretty straight shooter, comes out and says he hasn't been approached at all. So there was no real assessment done in terms of what Julia Gillard is now saying.
Doesn't change the fact, though, that ultimately this could still have passed if there had been support from the coalition.
Well, our position's been quite clear. We've been through a long policy process, which we're still going through, and we ask ourselves two questions in relation to these issues. Will any proposal work? And secondly, what are the consequences, including any possible unintended consequences of the proposal being put into place? And when we ask the question about mandatory pre-commitment, on the available evidence, we've come to the conclusion that it won't work, and that's for a number of reasons. The first is that the person concerned can set their own limit. So a person could set a limit of $20,000 or $50,000 even if they don't have that sort of funds available. But worse than that, if they've reached their limit and excluded for a day or so, they can then set another limit. So somebody who's got an addiction to gambling is likely to just come back, setting another limit and go higher. So the reality is that mandatory pre-commitment simply won't work, and that's why we've said we won't support bad policy.
Do you accept, though, that something does need to be done to curb poker machine use, and specifically for problem gamblers?
Yes, something does need to be done for problem gamblers, and we've said that all along. And we've said that let's put this in context in the first place. Most people who gamble in Australia do so in a responsible manner. You know, lots of people go to a club or a pub on a Friday or Saturday night and put a few dollars through the pokies. They're not harming anybody, they're not harming themselves, they're not harming their family, their children, they're not harming broader society. But there are a small group of problem gamblers. What we've said is we should be addressing these addictions like we address any other social addictions in society. And we do that by providing better education, we do it by providing counselling to people, and that's what we tend to do.
But those things already exist.
Well, they don't exist sufficiently, and the government has conceded that today, not in so many words, but by saying that they're going to put more money into these sort of services as part of the proposed trial in the ACT is evidence that the government itself believes that these services are not adequate at the present time.
Is there, though, any...
Shadow Minister for Families, Kevin Andrews, you can